We've got lots to talk about tonight. Maybe you want to talk about the BBC, which has finally admitted that it did pay for Huw Edwards' medical problems, his mental health treatment in a hospital stay after he was suspended from the BBC for forging an inappropriate relationship with a vulnerable young male crack addict who he gave loads of money to in exchange for explicit dirty pictures. After he did all that, the BBC paid for him to go into hospital because he was suffering from mental health issues. To be fair, that was prior to him being charged with paedophile offences, for which he pleaded guilty. He's now a convicted paedophile. But you would have thought that the BBC might have had a good idea that maybe, just maybe, Huw Edwards was a bit of a wrong 'un, and maybe, just maybe, they shouldn't be ploughing licence fee payers' money into his hospital treatment, underwriting his hospital treatment. I mean, after all, bloody bloke earned the best part of £500,000 a year. He could pay for it himself. What were they thinking? Let's talk to former leader of UKIP, borders expert Henry Bolton, OBE. Hello, Henry.
Good evening. Good evening.
Now, I know you've got your own story to tell about the BBC. We'll get to that in just a second. But what do you make of that? The BBC, following a Freedom of Information request, has finally conceded that it did pay for Huw Edwards' hospital treatment after his wife said, oh, he's having very serious mental health issues. Now, this was because he was suspended from his top job, his £450,000 a year job as the BBC's premier news anchor, the man who announced the death of the Queen, because they were paying for it. They were paying for it. He was suspended because he'd forged an inappropriate relationship with a vulnerable young male crack addict to whom Huw Edwards was paying tens of thousands of pounds, frankly, for dirty pictures. Yeah. They knew all that, and they paid for his hospital treatment. Is that good use of TV licence fee money, do you think, Henry?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I mean, of course I don't. I mean, one of the things about the TV licence fee is that, and we'll talk about it a bit more in a minute, as you say, but is that, we've got a whole load of people who are struggling, who are having to pay this licence fee, and it is going into the pockets of extremely wealthy men and women. And then when you get something like this, it's just rubbing salt into the wound. And I don't know, to be fair to the BBC, I have no idea whether they were under some sort of contractual obligation, some sort of employment sort of contractual obligation to Huw Edwards that they couldn't get out of. That I don't know. But nonetheless, we've got a problem in this country. We've got lots of problems in this country, but one of them is that we've got this rather sort of ivory tower elite, whether they're in government or whether they're in the hierarchy of the BBC or wherever they happen to be, who just think that they can ride roughshod over everybody else. They're just totally out of touch. I spoke to somebody who is rather on the left of politics a little while ago. He's a fairly well-known individual. And I said, look, you need to get out of your little sort of your privileged bubble in, with your wine bars and your little restaurants in sort of in these rather sort of affluent parts of London, and you need to come down to East Kent here and speak to some of the people in the pubs down here. You'll get a different worldview down there. And he said, well, I don't need to do that. You're just going to fill them full of people who are going to spout your story. They're just out of touch and they don't want to know the reality. It's too uncomfortable for them.
Now, the thing to remember here, Henry, is, as I say, Huw Edwards getting paid for by licence fee payer money was before the BBC knew about the paedophile offences. But they did know about what he'd been up to. That's why he was suspended. So I say they should have been a little bit more circumspect with what amounts.
Of course they should. 100% they should have done. And if there is such a contractual obligation, then they damn well need to address it. And they need to come clean as to why they've done this.
And the point to stress here is, at this point, the BBC and all the great and the good were condemning the Sun and the popular press, because the Sun broke the story about how Huw Edwards had preyed on this poor, vulnerable crack addict kid. And all the great and the good and the establishment go, oh, the tabloid press, disgusting. They're pillaring, the vilifying a good and decent man, Huw Edwards. You know, he wasn't a good and decent man. Subsequently, he was convicted, or he admitted paedophile offences. He's a low-life paedophile is what he is. But at this point, when they paid for his hospital fees, the BBC was part of the establishment's big effort to say it's wrong to give this guy a hard time. So never listen to the BBC and never listen to the great and the good when they're defending someone against the popular press. Let us move on. Tell us about your story, Henry, because I gather that the BBC believes you should be paying a licence fee to them when you don't really have need to. The BBC does think there are other examples. The BBC knocking on people's doors and telling them why they have to pay the BBC licence fee, and quite often they're not actually accurate in this. So tell us your story. Tell us your story.
Well, that's the point here. I received, or we received a letter saying, you know, you're going to get a visit from somebody because you've not paid a licence fee. Contact us if you don't need one. So I thought, I want to speak to these people because I got a similar letter 6 months ago, and I told them then I don't want to be every 6 months telling them the same thing. And so I rang them up, spoke to somebody who then said, well, do you watch anything at all, anything live on any device? And I said, well, 2 days ago, I watched the Starship launch that was broadcast on Twitter by SpaceX.
Yeah.
And they said, well, you need a license then. I said, no, I do not. And the difficulty here is that what you have to have a license if you are watching a live broadcast that is you're watching live a broadcast from a television channel. Yeah. And you might be streaming or whatever else. Then you need a license fee. However, if it's not a television channel, you do not need a license fee. And so that therein is the problem, because I was on the phone for about 15 minutes or so with this lady, and she kept on telling me that if I'm watching something on social media, for example, a podcast or something, a video blog, something like that, that's live or live a live space on Twitter, she was telling me that I need a license fee. Now, my problem here is how many people have been told this same story and have thought, oh, well, I don't watch the BBC. I don't watch any sort of terrestrial TV or anything through that sort of channel, that sort of means. But I do watch things, people talking on TikTok or on Twitter or something. Therefore, I need a license fee. They're being misled. Yeah. And my point is that, I did make a couple of posts on this, and I put the link to the Television Licensing Authority's rules on this, because the rules that they lay down, A, they're complicated, and I think deliberately so, and B, they've clearly got at least one staff member who is telling people something different. Yeah. And that's my problem. Yeah, and I mean, they are definitely, there are a lot of people in your position who are told by BBC flunkies that if you watch television at all, you have to pay a license fee. That's not true. Yeah. That isn't true. You're right. You're right, Kevin. But the problem I've got is that they're now talking in this conversation. They were clearly talking to me about watching for people, whether it's a private person or anybody else, putting something live on social media. In which case, not a television station or anything like that, but an individual. And they were clearly implying in all but stating it that you need a television license to view that, which is of course rubbish, but it's expanding. I mean, they're under pressure with the TV license fee now, and I think they're just trying to catch people who don't know any better. Yeah. And I think that is as wrong. That is as dishonest. Well, it's theft almost. Yeah. I mean, it's gaining pecuniary advantage by deception, which is, I think, the definition of fraud. It used to be. Everybody, be careful. Have a look at the terms of the BBC TV licence, because I think that
at least the people who work for the BBC don't quite understand what you don't have to pay for. And there are lots of circumstances you can watch British television and other sources of vision without having to pay the licence fee. So be very careful. Henry, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. Henry Bolton there, OBE, former leader of the UKIP and a Borders expert. So what do you reckon? Do you think the BBC should have paid for Huw Edwards' hospital fees when he was suspended in disgrace? Future paedophile, wasn't known he was a paedophile then, to be fair. But really, they're taking our money and just flashing it around to all the great and the good and their mates. What do you reckon?